It was a legendary MLB stadium that went abandoned over the course of 6 years, guys. Today we are going to be talking about the story of Shibe Park, otherwise known as Connie Mack Stadium. Now, this stadium originally broke ground back in 1908 and officially opened in 1909. It closed in 1970, went abandoned over the course of 6 years, and was demolished in 1976. Now, this stadium was super rare, especially for the early 1900s, when you consider its beautiful brick design exterior with the very nice circular corner tower. If the exterior reminds you of anything, you can kind of see a similar type setup with T-Mobile Park in Seattle. The stadium hosted several World Series early on in its lifespan, and it actually had a similar problem that Fenway Park did. Now, if you remember Fenway Park, the reason they had the Green Monster was because people were looking over the fence watching the game. That's the same thing that happened with Shibe Park, and as long as the A's, the Philadelphia Athletics at that time, were winning games and filling the park, everything was fine. Unfortunately, that changed in the early 1930s, starting in 1932. With the Great Depression happening and a bad economy, seat attendance plummeted, and in the winter of 1934, it was ordered the fence to be raised to 34 feet. The fence severely limited the view from the street, and it also frustrated many Philadelphia players, both offensively and defensively, based on the new configuration that really shouldn't have been there. The only reason it was there was because of the Great Depression, limiting the overall attendance, and a lot of people kind of getting a free ticket to the game being on the original rooftops, because they did have rooftops at Shibe Park based on the shorter fence. Once they really raised the fence in the 1930s, that all went away. So you could say it was the original rooftops. We know now, modern day Wrigley Field, they've kind of made that whole thing legendary with the neighborhood rooftops. Now, this stadium did start to show some age in the 1950s and the 60s, and the original stadium exterior was expanded with an unprecedented renovation. A top deck roof was added to the original outer structure, and you can see just how bad it looks. The original great brick tower design, beautiful, and then kind of the top deck roof structure surrounding it. You can just see some color shots of Shibe Park, or at this point Connie Mack Stadium, in the late 50s to the 60s, the final years of the ballpark. But overall, this stadium only having a capacity of 33,000, it was a significant downfall. I will say there is, of course, the alternate history, like we've seen with Wrigley Field, like we've seen with Fenway Park, to where they renovate this entire stadium area, modernize it a bit, and really turn it into a legendary stadium, because the only thing separating this from Fenway and from Wrigley was just the unfortunate circumstance, the boom of the multi-purpose stadiums, and it really is just kind of bad luck, because when you think about it and you look back at the city of Boston, they had several different multi-purpose stadium designs and proposals to replace Fenway Park. One of them was a Boston Dome. You had Chicago with a potential two stadiums that were shared by one roof. That fell through. So really, one of the main reasons this ballpark didn't survive was just straight up bad luck, and also Philadelphia getting caught up in the multi-purpose stadium craze. And that enters in, of course, Veterans Stadium with the giant circle concrete upper deck, the absolute Death Star of those stadiums, which was constructed in the late 60s and opened in 1970. And what does that mean for Shibe Park / Connie Mack Stadium? Well, it unfortunately went into a state of abandonment. And what's so unique is this was a legendary stadium with a beautiful brick exterior. There are actually some really nice detailed photos of the stadium exterior that were taken in 1973. So the context to that is this stadium was abandoned over the course of 3 years, and I will say the exterior of it still looks relatively good. I feel like if something would have, went abandoned in the city of Philadelphia today, it would not look this good, but back in the 70s, the upkeep on this, it looks very nice, even though you could see clear deterioration in the windows and in the overall structure, it still looked good enough. There was also a major fire once the stadium went abandoned about a year after it, which really damaged a lot of the seating structures. And you can see just numerous photos and documentation of this stadium from 1971 to 1976 in various states of abandonment, and it keeps getting worse and worse and worse, and eventually it does get demolished, sadly, in 1976. And there's really nothing left of it at this point. It was totally demolished. Nothing was saved. And that is the story of Shibe Park. So it was a stadium. I would say the exterior is just amazing. You know, I really wish, and we've talked about this before, the idea of a team building a retro style stadium, kind of combining a beautiful brick exterior like this with a modern design, going with, because upper decks at this point are already going out of style, just go with a 2-deck approach around 3/4 of the stadium, just like Shibe Park. I mean, Shibe Park, when you look at the original design, if you replaced the seating, you put in an actual wall in right field with a very small stand, and then maybe like a bar area and a modern area and like a ballpark village beyond that, this would be a legendary ballpark. There's no doubt in my mind. With that exterior, it is so beautiful, and you could even build it up on top of that if you had to, based off of the design. Now, obviously, when you look at the seating, you know, you've got the poles and stuff, and those would all have to be removed, and you would have to modernize the entire thing. You might have to do something like the New York Yankees did in 1973 when they had a huge renovation. Obviously, I'm not a fan of the Yankees' 1973 renovation because they made a monster upper deck and really expanded it and kind of made it worse, but I do think it could have worked if they wanted to invest into this stadium. But you got to remember the time period in the late 60s, early 70s. What was the best thing to do in terms of being cost effective? It was to build a multi-purpose stadium. You get 2 teams into one stadium, football, baseball, and it's done. And that enters in Veterans Stadium. And unfortunately, Shibe Park is no more. It falls into abandonment over 6 years, and then it does get demolished. Kind of similar to Tiger Stadium, but this was even more abandoned than Tiger Stadium was. Tiger Stadium, they did try and save. This stadium, especially after the fire, which really gutted a lot of its sections, it was completely done. And it did also host Philadelphia Eagles NFL games in 1940 and over a longer period of time as well, from 1942 to 1957, along with, of course, the original Philadelphia Athletics of the AL from 1909 to 1954 and the Philadelphia Phillies of the NL from 1938 through 1970, and then the Phillies move into the Vet. Now, when it comes to the original Shibe Park design behind home plate, you can see the way it kind of creates an obtuse angle on both sides rather than the typical curve we're used to with stadiums. That was a design feature that was brought to Citizens Bank Park as kind of a badge of honor to the original Shibe Park. It is a little curious that Citizens Bank Park didn't decide to do a beautiful brick exterior. I think the only thing that's really missing when it comes to Citizens Bank Park is a great exterior design, which is curious considering they wanted to do kind of an odd and a remembrance to Shibe Park. That's why they made the angled area and upper deck behind home plate the way it was, but they don't decide to do anything with the exterior. It's kind of mind-boggling to me. I mean, I'm not complaining about Citizens Bank Park. I think most people can agree it's a top 10 MLB stadium, and even if you don't think it is, it's like number 12 or number 13. It certainly is in the top 15 in terms of stadiums, but it would have been, for me, probably top 5 or top 3 if they would have had a beautiful exterior design that was based off of kind of the circle tower brick architecture of Shibe Park. That would have made it super elite, but at least they did do something. And Citizens Bank Park kind of has its own charm with the angles, the acute little angles at the end of each of the upper decks on the stands. But either way, guys, that is the story of Shibe Park, lasting for around 60 years, being built in the early 1900s and officially getting demolished in 1976 after 5 years of straight abandonment. That's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.